The soft ping of the seatbelt sign switching off ripples through the cabin of Flight AC-137 from Toronto to Chicago. A chorus of unbuckling clicks follows as passengers settle in for the short international hop. From the cockpit, Connor MacNeil makes a final adjustment to the autopilot, his movements precise and economical. 15 years of flying transborder routes has made this as natural as breathing. The aircraft levels at cruising altitude, the Canadian skies clear above Lake Ontario. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've reached our cruising altitude of 33,000 feet. Weather in Chicago looks clear, and we expect a smooth flight with an on-time arrival. The cabin crew will begin service shortly. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight. Connor's voice carries the slight lilt of his Nova Scotia upbringing. Gentle, assured, professional. The kind of voice that instinctively calms nervous flyers. That calm shatters 3 minutes later. Hey, this isn't what I ordered. Don't you people understand English up here? The voice booms from first class, drowning out conversations and the gentle hum of the engines. Connor's co-pilot raises an eyebrow. Sounds like Sarah's got a live one back there. Through the partially open cockpit door, Connor watches as Sarah, his lead flight attendant, speaks in measured tones to a red-faced man in 2A. Despite her quiet voice, the man's responses grow increasingly loud. I don't care about your Canadian protocols. I fly business class twice a week in the States, and I know how things are supposed to work. The co-pilot chuckles. $10 says he's from New York. Chicago, Connor corrects, recognizing the distinctive Midwestern inflection beneath the bluster. And I'd say he's about 2 complaints away from becoming my problem. As if on cue, the passenger's voice rises again. I want to speak to whoever's in charge of this aircraft, not some flight attendant who can't even get a simple drink order right. Connor takes a deep breath. In the confined space of an aircraft at 33,000 feet, there's nowhere for tension to dissipate, and this tension is just beginning to take flight. Connor. MacNeil had started flying at 16. Taking lessons in his uncle's rickety Cessna over the windswept coast of Nova Scotia. 27 years later, he commanded Airbus A320s with the steady hand and unflappable demeanor that had become his trademark at the airline. Other pilots might lose their cool during turbulence or mechanical hiccups, but Connor's voice never wavered, his decisions never rushed. The sky gives you all the time you need to think, his uncle had told him, until suddenly it doesn't. That philosophy had guided Connor through thunderstorms, medical emergencies, and, yes, difficult passengers. Captain, I'm sorry to disturb you. Sarah stands at the cockpit door, her professional smile strained at the edges. We have a situation in first class. Let me guess. 2A? Connor already knows the answer. Derek Lawson, Chicago businessman. Sarah lowers her voice. He's been complaining since takeoff. First about the boarding process, then the seat dimensions, now the drink service. He's demanding to speak with you. Tell Mr. Lawson I'm currently flying the plane. Sarah's expression says everything. I did. He said, and I quote, "That's what autopilot is for." From the cabin comes another loud complaint. This is why I fly American. Canadian service is a joke. The comment lands like a personal insult. Connor prides himself not just on his flying, but on representing Canadian aviation. Professional, courteous, and, yes, distinctly different from sea. American carriers in subtle ways that matter. Derek Lawson doesn't fit the stereotype of the friendly Midwesterner. His voice carries the sharp edge of entitlement. His complaints the certainty of someone used to getting his way. His tailored suit and monogrammed cufflinks scream corporate success almost as loudly as his actual screaming about the temperature being 2 degrees too warm. The other first-class passengers shift uncomfortably. A mother in economy covers her child's ears. The flight attendants exchange glances, their practiced smiles faltering. What's our ETA? Connor asks his co-pilot. 53 minutes to O'Hare. Connor nods, making a decision. I'll speak with him. Can't have him disrupting the entire flight. He stands, straightens his uniform, and adds with a hint of dry humor, "If we suddenly start descending, it's because I've deployed him as an anchor." Connor steps into the cabin, immediately registering the tension. Passengers glance up with expressions ranging from curiosity to relief at the sight of his uniform. The 4 gold stripes on his sleeve carry authority that transcends borders. Derek Lawson is unmistakable. Mid-50s, salt and pepper hair expertly styled, gesturing with manicured hands as he berates the flight attendant. "Mr. Lawson?" Connor's voice is quiet but carries the gravity of command. "I understand there's an issue with your service today." Derek swivels, sizing up Connor with the practiced eye of someone used to establishing dominance in boardrooms. Finally, someone who might understand how things should work. Derek's voice projects for an audience. "Your staff doesn't seem to grasp the concept of first-class service. In the States, in Canada, sir, first class includes courtesy to the crew." Connor's interruption is gentle but firm. "What seems to be the specific problem?" "Specific?" Derek scoffs. "Where do I start? The boarding was chaos. The welcome drink was room temperature. This seat is at least an inch narrower than on American carriers. And now," he gestures at his glass, "this isn't the premium scotch I requested," Sarah interjects softly. "Sir, as I explained, we carry Glenlivet 18, not Macallan. And I explained that's unacceptable." Derek's voice rises again. Several passengers flinch. Connor notices a young boy watching wide-eyed from across the aisle, his mother whispering reassurances. "Mr. Lawson, I'd be happy to discuss our beverage selection, but I'd appreciate if you'd lower your voice." "We have other passengers. That's your problem. I paid for first class not to be treated like economy." A ripple of murmurs spreads through the cabin. A woman in the second row shakes her head disapprovingly. "At Derek, not the crew." "Sir," Connor maintains his composure, "our primary concern is the safety and comfort of all passengers." "Don't give me that safety speech. I want what I paid for, and I want someone to acknowledge that your service doesn't meet international standards." An elderly gentleman across the aisle clears his throat. "Young man, I fly between Toronto and New York monthly, and I find Canadian service superior." "Nobody asked you," Derek snaps, then turns back to Connor. "Are you going to fix this or not? Because I have contacts at the FAA who'd be interested in how you run things." Connor feels a line being crossed, not just of professionalism, but of basic human respect. The cabin seems to hold its collective breath, waiting for his response. The tension crescendos when Derek abruptly stands, violating the active seatbelt sign that had illuminated moments earlier as they encountered light turbulence. "Sir, you need to remain seated with your seatbelt fastened." Connor's tone hardens slightly. "I need to use the restroom," Derek announces, taking a step into the aisle just as the aircraft hits an air pocket. The sudden drop is minor, routine, for experienced flyers, but enough to throw Derek off balance. He stumbles, grabbing Connor's arm for support. Coffee from a nearby tray sloshes onto the floor. "This is exactly what I mean." Derek's voice rises to a near shout. "Incompetent piloting on top of everything else." The accusation strikes at the core of Connor's professional identity. 27 years without incident, 14 as captain, and this man is questioning his competence over standard clear air turbulence. "Mr. Lawson, please return to your seat immediately." Connor's voice remains level, but a new firmness enters it. That turbulence was forecasted and announced. Your safety requires compliance with crew instructions. Don't patronize me. I've been flying since you were in diapers, Sarah steps forward. Sir, federal aviation regulations require... Oh, spare me the regulations speech. Derek cuts her off with a dismissive wave. I know my rights as a passenger. The aircraft trembles slightly again. Connor notices the young boy across the aisle. Clutching his mother's hand, eyes wide with anxiety that has nothing to do with turbulence and everything to do with the angry man shouting. "Mr. Lawson." Connor lowers his voice, forcing Derek to lean in to hear him. "This is not just about you anymore. Your behavior is affecting everyone on this aircraft. That child is frightened, not of flying, but of your outbursts." For a moment, Derek glances at the boy, a flicker of self-awareness crossing his face before the indignation returns. If parents can't control their children's emotions, that's hardly my... That's enough. Connor's interruption is quiet, but carries the weight of absolute authority. The cabin falls silent. Even the ambient conversation stops. "You have two choices, Mr. Lawson. Return to your seat and conduct yourself appropriately for the remainder of this flight, or I will make an emergency landing at Buffalo and have you removed from this aircraft." Derek's face flushes crimson. "You wouldn't dare. Do you know who I am?" Connor meets his gaze steadily. "At 33,000 feet, I know exactly who you are, sir. You're a passenger on my aircraft who is creating a safety concern. Your credentials, connections, and frequent flyer status are irrelevant compared to the safety of everyone aboard." The ultimatum hangs in the air between them, a point of no return. Derek's face cycles through emotions: anger, disbelief, calculation. His eyes dart around the cabin, finally registering what he's been too self-absorbed to notice. Every passenger is watching him, and not one face shows sympathy. The elderly gentleman who spoke earlier gives Connor an approving nod. A businesswoman in the third row has her phone partially raised, as if contemplating whether to record the confrontation. The flight attendants stand united, their professional demeanor unbroken, but their support for their captain unmistakable. Most damning of all, the young boy is now pressed against his mother, his face half hidden in her sleeve. "You're making a scene," Derek hisses, lowering his voice as if the confrontation were Connor's doing. "No, sir. You've been making a scene since we reached cruising altitude. I'm attempting to resolve it." A quiet but unmistakable sound filters through the cabin, the gentle tap of applause from economy class, where passengers have been following the exchange. Derek's flush deepens. Public humiliation is kryptonite to men like him. Connor knows. The corporate world rewards assertiveness, even aggression, but there's a line between demanding excellence and behaving like a bully. Derek has crossed it, and now an airplane full of witnesses knows it too. "Look," Derek's tone shifts abruptly to a conspiratorial whisper. "We got off on the wrong foot. I've had a stressful week closing a major deal in Toronto. The Canadians drive a hard bargain." He forces a chuckle, attempting to create an alliance. Connor doesn't smile back. "Stress isn't an excuse for disrespecting my crew or disrupting this flight. I'm not." Derek begins to protest, then stops as a voice calls from several rows back. "Just apologize, mate. We all want a peaceful flight." The Australian accent carries clearly through the cabin, prompting murmurs of agreement from other passengers. Derek's jaw tightens. He's losing control of the narrative, and Connor can see him recalculating, weighing his pride against the growing public sentiment against him. "Fine," he says tersely. "I apologize if I was overly assertive in my expectations." The words come out stiff, perfunctory. "Thank you," Connor acknowledges, but doesn't move. "And to my crew," Derek hesitates, looking at Sarah and the other flight attendants. The silence stretches, weighted with expectation. Even the engine noise seems to dim as passengers hold their breath, witnessing the power struggle unfold in real time, a microcosm of something larger than one flight, one pilot, one passenger. "I apologize to the crew as well," Derek finally concedes, the words barely audible. Connor nods but remains standing. The apology was necessary but insufficient. Something in him knows this moment matters beyond this flight, that men like Derek move through the world, leaving wakes of disrespect unless someone holds the line. "Mr. Lawson, I'd like to show you something if you'll permit me." Curiosity flickers across Derek's face. He gives a cautious nod. First, please fasten your seatbelt. After Derek complies, Connor pulls out his tablet from his uniform pocket and brings up a navigation display. This is our current flight path over Lake Erie. He tilts the screen so Derek can see it. Each decision I make as captain affects everyone aboard this aircraft. That responsibility requires something essential: trust. Connor zooms in on the display. The passengers trust me to make sound decisions. My crew trusts me to support them. Even you, despite your complaints, trust me with your life every moment we're airborne. Derek shifts uncomfortably. In 30 years of commercial flying, Connor continues, I've noticed something fascinating. A plane is perhaps the most honest social environment humans have created. Status markers, money, connections, job titles mean nothing compared to how you treat others in a metal tube hurtling through the sky. Connor switches to another screen showing the complex systems of the A320. This aircraft doesn't care if you're a CEO or a college student. Physics doesn't negotiate. When I announce turbulence and activate the seatbelt sign, it's not a suggestion. When my crew gives instructions, they're not optional courtesies. Derek's expression has changed. The hostility has faded, replaced with something harder to read. Aviation has taught me that true authority isn't about asserting power. It's about earning trust through competence and respect. My crew doesn't follow my instructions because of these. Connor touches the stripes on his sleeve. But because I've earned their confidence. He pauses, letting the words land. Similarly, they deserve your respect not because they serve you, but because they're trained. Professionals responsible for everyone's safety and comfort. Connor leans in slightly, his voice quieter but more intense. Mr. Lawson, in Chicago boardrooms, your approach might yield results, but at 33,000 feet, cooperation and mutual respect aren't just niceties, they're necessities. Derek meets Connor's gaze for a long moment. Something shifts in his expression. Not surrender exactly, but recognition. He gives a single, almost imperceptible nod. May I get you a fresh drink, sir? Connor asks, not as capitulation, but as an opportunity for reset. Glenlivet is fine, Derek responds quietly. Thank you. The remainder of the flight proceeds with a palpable shift in atmosphere. Derek sips his Glenlivet quietly, his earlier bluster replaced by contemplative silence. Occasionally, he glances at the young boy across the aisle, who has returned to his coloring book now that the storm has passed. When Sarah offers a warm towel before landing, Derek accepts with a genuine, thank you. She responds with the same professional courtesy she extends to every passenger, neither coldly formal nor overly accommodating. It's a small exchange, unremarkable except for how different it feels from their earlier interaction. Connor returns to the cockpit, his co-pilot, raising an eyebrow in silent question. Crisis averted, Connor says simply. You're getting good at passenger whispering, the co-pilot jokes. What was his deal anyway? Connor considers this as he begins the descent checklist. Same as most difficult passengers. Forgot he was a person, first, and a customer second. The approach into O'Hare is textbook smooth. Connor's voice comes over the intercom, delivering the standard arrival announcement. There's nothing in his tone to suggest the confrontation that occurred an hour earlier. No edge, no residual tension. This, too, is professionalism. As passengers, prepare to disembark, Connor stands at the cockpit door as he always does, thanking each person for flying with them. When Derek approaches, there's a moment of recognition between them. Captain. Derek extends his hand. Thank you for a safe flight. The words carry more weight than the standard pleasantry. Both men know it. My pleasure, Mr. Lawson. I hope you'll fly with us again. Derek hesitates, then says with unexpected sincerity, I was out of line earlier. You run a good aircraft. We all have our moments. Connor's handshake is firm, neither dominant nor submissive. Safe travels in Chicago. The young boy and his mother are among the last to depart. The child pauses, looking up at Connor with undisguised admiration. "Are you the boss of the whole airplane?" he asks. Connor smiles, crouching to the boy's eye level. "Just the flying part. It takes a whole team to get everyone where they're going safely." The mother mouths a silent "thank you" over her son's head, for the smooth flight perhaps, or for resolving the conflict that had frightened her child. Connor nods in acknowledgement. As the last passenger exits, Connor returns to the cockpit to complete his post-flight checks, the encounter with Derek already fading into the tapestry of experiences that make up a career in the sky. 2 weeks later, Connor pilots another Toronto-Chicago route. As passengers board, he notices a familiar face in first class, Derek Lawson, already settled in 2A. Their eyes meet briefly. Derek gives a small nod of recognition, different from the entitled demeanor of their first encounter. Connor returns the nod professionally before continuing his pre-flight preparations. When Sarah enters the cockpit with her pre-departure report, Connor inquires, "How's our friend in 2A today?" "Mr. Lawson?" Sarah sounds surprised. "Perfect gentleman. Asked about the weather in Chicago, said please and thank you. Even complimented the boarding procedure." Connor smiles slightly but says nothing more. As the aircraft climbs through Canadian airspace toward the American border, Connor reflects on the invisible boundaries we navigate daily, not just between nations, but between our better and lesser selves. In the cockpit, pilots call these decision points commits and go-arounds, moments when you must either proceed with your chosen path or recalibrate entirely. Derek Lawson had been given that rare thing, a chance to see himself through others' eyes, to recognize the wake of his actions in an environment where escape was impossible. More surprisingly, he had taken the opportunity to course correct. How many conflicts, personal, professional, even international, spiral needlessly because no one creates space for recalibration without surrender? How often do we mistake dominance for strength, volume for authority? Perhaps the true lesson of the sky isn't just about physics and aerodynamics, but about the delicate human calibrations required when lives literally hang in the balance. About recognizing that credentials and status mean nothing compared to character and conduct. In a world increasingly divided by borders both geographical and ideological, maybe what we need most are not more assertive declarations of who's right, but more skilled navigators who understand that getting everyone safely to their destination matters more than who has the loudest voice or the most impressive title. After all, at 33,000 feet, we are neither Canadian nor American, neither executive, nor service worker. We are simply humans, suspended between earth and sky, utterly dependent on mutual respect and shared competence. The true test of character isn't how we behave when things go our way, but how we respond when confronted with our own turbulence. And perhaps the most powerful leadership isn't about asserting authority, but about creating conditions where others can recognize the best in themselves. Connor makes a small adjustment to their heading, crossing the invisible line between Canadian and American airspace. Below, Lake Erie stretches blue and boundless, indifferent to the human boundaries drawn across its surface. Some borders, it seems, exist only because we agree they do,